So I'll start. I'll model what I asked you all to do. My name is Carlin Lairway. I'm the Director of Assessment and Accountability here at the department.
Tim McMurtry, State Department of Education. Deputy Superintendent.
Karen C., Director of Federal Programs.
Jeannie Standall with the Idaho Commission for Libraries.
Carrie Overall, President of the Idaho Education Association.
Sue Igdorsky, Executive Director of the IEA.
Pete Kohler, State Department Chief Deputy.
Jeff Martin, Idaho Digital Learning.
Johanna from the department.
Duncan Robb, STE.
Kevin Whitman, the Accountability Coordinator on Carlin's team.
I'm Tyson Carter, I'm the School Improvement Coordinator. I'm Chris Rodine, just Media Relations, State Department of Education.
Alice Moswell, Communication Director, State Department.
Karen Echeverria, Executive Director, School Boards Association.
I'm Quinn Perry. I'm the new Policy and Government Affairs Director for the school board.
Welcome, Quinn.
Hi, I'm Allison Hank, and I'm the Accountability Program Manager for the State Board of Education. And on the phone, we have Debbie Critchfield. Debbie, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
I'll just say thanks for setting up the webinar and phone call for me, State Board of Ed.
And we also have Kirsten Kerr, and Kirsten, I believe, is with the Library Commission. Is that right?
She's with the Idaho Library Association.
Thank you, Idaho Library Association. Thank you. And Kirsten said she will just type in her comments and feedback in using the questions box. So that will work. So I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. Thank you for indulging me in the introductions. We do have a presentation. Debbie, I don't know, are you signed in to the webinar as well so you can see the screen that we're sharing at this time?
Do you want to? Yes.
I just want to make sure she is. You are. I'm
looking at Idaho Consolidated Plan. Sherry's on the right of the picture.
Great. I just want to make sure we're connected. So before we do that, Karen's going to start and give us a little update on our STAT team and what feedback we've gotten from that so far. So.
Okay, great. Yes, I am excited to share information about the State Technical Assistance Team. And you may remember that under our plan, we are identifying comprehensive support and improvement schools next summer. And those comprehensive support and improvement schools, or CSI schools, are those lowest performing schools and high schools that are graduating fewer than 67%. In preparation for identifying those schools, we have put together, invited on a volunteer basis, leadership teams from seven schools representing 6 districts. And we've asked them to participate alongside with the core state technical assistance team here at the SCE to refine school improvement systems and processes so that we can begin the next year, 18-19, identifying those CSI schools just with our feet on the ground, and we know what we're doing. So everything we're doing this year with those 7 schools will help inform our practices next year. You can see the list of districts and schools who are participating, again, on a volunteer basis. We started out meeting as a whole group. We gave information about what the STAT team is and what it isn't. We talked about the importance of leadership roles. We gave a presentation on the new school-wide improvement plan application, because this is something that under ESSA, every CSI school has to complete a school improvement plan, and then the state has to, they have to write a school improvement plan, state has to approve it. So we did that. Each one of these schools has been assigned a capacity builder, and that's through the, from the Idaho Building Capacity Project, which is a coaching model. It's a joint partnership between SDE and the 3 main universities, BSU, ISU, and U of I. And these coaches are helping the schools with their comprehensive needs assessment, completing the plan, and just being a partner alongside them through this process. We have had check-ins. We are getting ready to have our 3rd check-in with each one of these schools. And then their plans will be due February 15th. We will have a one-on-one meeting, our STAT core group, with each one of these schools to review their plans together. And then in March, we have another big professional development couple of days planned. So we are quite excited about all the work that we are getting done this year in order to inform what we're going to do and how we're going to partner with the CSI schools next year.
Any questions for Karen?
A couple of questions that I want to make sure we're clear. When we say that schools are going to write a improvement, is that going to be part of the LEA's improvement plan, or will this stand as a separate, on its own improvement plan? And then who receives and reviews?
Sure, thank you for that question. So under ESSA, there are certain things that a school must address in their school improvement plan. It begins with a comprehensive needs assessment, have to identify intervention strategies. So it is a separate plan than the board's current continuous improvement plan. And under ESSA, the state has to approve those CSI school improvement plans.
Is the State Department of Ed, or is it the SEA, which is the board?
ESSA, under ESSA, it always references the SEA. Mm-hmm.
And then the second question that I've got that's important for dissemination is these are Title I schools. What if the school that is selected or falls within this category, even though they're not a Title I school? How are we addressing their needs?
Although we won't be able to give them Title I funds because there will be flow-through funds for all of the CSI Title I schools, we will be able to offer them services such as a capacity builder, which I referred to earlier, access to the Idaho Superintendent's Network, the Idaho Principals Network, the Idaho Principal Mentoring Project. So those will all be resources for those non-title schools.
So so the STAT team will service them, and the real difference is there's no federal money floating to those schools.
That's correct.
That's the only difference. Right?
Okay. Yeah, any other questions?
So Karen, going back to that, what Pete alluded to with the plan, could they not be one and the same if the district chose to write them that way?
As long as the
If they incorporate everything that you require
yeah.
and the state board requires, couldn't it be one plan?
We do have a tool. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a school improvement plan. Okay. The district has to approve it, the state has to approve it, and we do have an application that we have built for that. And what we did new this year, and we are getting lots of accolades about it, but previously a school would have to write a school-wide plan and a school improvement plan if they were both. And what Tyson and Kathy did is that they put those two together. So now a school-wide school in improvement only has to write one plan.
I do think that the key difference there is that the continuous improvement plans are district
Right.
level, right? And the school improvement plans are school level, and so the ability to merge is tricky, at least with the current law, right? That would be challenging.
So these 7 schools are just helping you make sure your processes are in
Yes.
place for the coming year. So
Yes.
they're getting additional money this year to help you guys practice your process.
Yes, for
essentially.
1 year.
For 1 year.
Mhm. And we received permission from the feds to do that.
And these were schools that were previously identified in the old system. So these
That's
aren't
priority
newly
and
identified.
focus.
These were the old priority focus, the carryover schools that were still receiving funding. So we just used it in this way
Yes.
to model our
In our October whole group meeting, we went to great ends to ensure that everybody in the room knew that there was no list. Nobody was being identified. We had to choose or invite schools to participate from that priority and focus list, which Carlin just mentioned, and then schools could say yes or no.
who says no to money.
What's that?
Who says no to money, right?
Depends on what you're asking.
We did have one school say no.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. We did. All right, thanks, Karen. Do you want to share some of the feedback? I know we did have some
yes,
positive
thank
comments,
you.
so please share. 'Cause
Yes.
I think this is the highlight for us.
So thank you
Or it should be for
for
Karen and her
for remembering that, because we did get some feedback after we connected with schools in our check-ins. So for example, one school said academic league information, and so that's comparable data, a school that is demographically similar, and Kevin might be talking about that later. But Academic League information is very helpful to know that there is another like school from which we can learn. We've never received data from the state like what Carlin and Kevin have provided. In our October meeting, those schools were just drooling over this data packet that Kevin and Carlin provided them, and it was really cool to see. Another quote, even though I am not part of the leadership team, I still have an opportunity to give feedback and I have a voice. So although leadership teams are starting the work, then they're taking it back to their staff and they're getting input. So that is a very good process. This opportunity is a breath of fresh air to decide what is working, what's not working, what could be better. It's like spring cleaning. It's a great opportunity. So lots more other, a lot of other feedback, but those are just a few.
I think we should celebrate the good stuff. So
I do too.
I'm glad you could do that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to turn now into the webinar. So Kirsten and Debbie and anyone else, I'll check to see if anyone else has joined us, but Kirsten and Debbie, it's just you two on the call and online with us. So we'll use the presentation I have prepared today to start. So you all have seen, I think Allison sent you the feedback, the letter we received with the initial feedback. And so today we're going to spend a little bit of time in two areas that were specifically, I don't want to say rejected because that seems like a strong word, but were specifically addressed in the feedback letter as not complying with the requirements in ESSA. And so to address those two areas, the other areas of the plan, and if you have questions about that, we'll have time for those, but the other areas of the plan that we received feedback on were really technical corrections where we had to provide additional information or clarification or further flesh out details. I think Matt had one in his area around spending and making sure that we were very explicit in how we spent money and meeting those requirements. So we consider those really technical corrections, but these two areas that we'll talk about today, end size and the other academic indicator, are specifically those that really are, I would say, a significant change to the plan in what everyone else has seen before. So to that end, we'll start with end size because it's everyone's favorite topic. When I say end size, does everyone know what we're referring to? The number of students needed to be in a calculation in order to get captured in an accountability model. So Duncan will hand out a page here. This is quite large. And I'm sorry for those of you on the phone, I don't have this to view, but I will make sure that we send it to you, Debbie and Kirsten, so you can have a look at it. But remember in our plan, we submitted 20 students as our end size for the all students group. And we submitted 10 as the end size for the subgroup. And the feedback from the U.S. Department of Education is that we cannot have two separate end sizes, that the end size must be uniform across all students and all student subgroups. So we went back to our data, and Kevin compiled this based on 2017 data. And this is actually the number of Title I schools. What you're seeing is the number of Title I schools that get picked up or included in the accountability considerations for both the all students group and then those subgroups. And the subgroups are your race and ethnicity subgroups, your students with disabilities, English learners, and economically disadvantaged. So as we talk about the end size for 20, we thought that was a statistically sound number. That was one of the reasons that we recommended that. It had less noise in the CSI identification calculation. By noise, we mean variability. If a student leaves your school or is absent the entire test window and they're your highest achieving student and you only have an N of 10, you sometimes, or a lower N size, you introduce high variability from year to year with just one or possibly two students. So the higher the N size, the more stable your calculation becomes. And then we noted that with the N size of 20, fewer schools would be identified for targeted support improvement. So the all students group, if you drew a box around all students, that's specific for comprehensive support and improvement. That's the school system fundamental change TSI targeted support is where those subgroups performance does not meet a specific standard. And in that identification, there is no funding for targeted support and improvement schools. There's no flow-through money, so it's up to the state to provide support. ESSA requires we identify them. That's it. Identify them.
And then if they don't perform?
Yeah, there's a systematic rollover of information if students in subgroups don't perform over a period of 3 years or within an identification cycle period. But initially, we identify them. So we all know students or schools don't change behavior simply because they're on a list. But in this case, targeted support schools would still have access to some of our services, but have no funding or flow-through monies at all.
Under ESSA, the LEA is responsible for the TSI schools. So they're responsible for ensuring that they write a plan and they approve their plan.
But a TSI school will or will not be identified on the report card.
Yes.
So that is the difference. So it may not mean a whole lot. If you've been a principal of a school that's identified, there will be something that when somebody goes to your website, it'll pop up and say, you are not adequate. Those are my words, not what it's going to say in the report card. But that there's an issue there, that there's something of a scarlet letter against that school, even if it's only one subcategory.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Pete, I guess anyone can answer this question, but you've raised it in my mind. When you say it will be on a website, it's on specifically the school's website and or the state?
Yes, Debbie, beyond the schools. The discussion was around, just again for everyone's knowledge, when the school's report card is published, there's going to be a rating for the school in the sense that if it is a distinguished school, it will have something that will show, right now, just for lack of anything better, a blue ribbon may appear if you're in the top 10%. Also, though, if you are in that bottom 5% or you're identified, there is an identifier. Again, it's not a star or a poke in the eye, but there is an identifier there that would say, hey, mom and dad, just be aware. And so what that would look like on the report card, has not been finished yet because we're still in the conversations with the developer on the report card, but it would be something. And as somebody who has been a high school principal, and frankly, with parents and with teachers, that's going to be an area that you're not going to jump up and down about if you're identified as something not necessarily positive, though it doesn't mean you're losing money or anything else. So that's just something that has to be taken into consideration.
So to clarify, the report card, Debbie, is published at the state level for districts and schools are required to make that publicly reported report card available on their website as well. That's a requirement for Title I funding. So it's really highlighted in both, but how we do that has yet to be determined. But ESSA also requires CSI schools funding and plans for improvement be available on the report card as well. So there's a little more detail for CSI schools, but TSI identification or targeted support, very finite population-specific gaps in performance is what's highlighted in a subgroup calculation. So we went with N size of 10 for that subgroup because it ensures minority groups and small schools are identified. So that was the concern, is that small subgroups of minority students would get missed. Number of schools eligible for comprehensive support improvement with an N size of 10 doesn't change much from 20. And then there's also that consideration that there's more noise in the comprehensive school identification system. So we're bringing back to you the two options that we originally started with, 20 and 10, and we're saying we have to pick one, but now we'll go to the next option, which is other considerations. And I think it's important to think about those. So the other considerations would be to look at an N size of 15 as a compromise in the middle, really strictly for that. If you look at the worksheet, and Debbie will try to, and Kirsten will try to maybe walk through this slightly so you hear it. In the all students in K-8, you'll see that there's 345 schools in an N size of 10. That would be, these are Title I schools only, that would be in the bucket, if you will, for identification. And with 15 students, it's 344, so we lose 1. And if you go to an N of 20, it's 339. You drop 6 out of the bucket. So across the state, it's a pretty insignificant change when you go from 20 to 10 in the all students group, okay? So 15 is kind of that compromise as a suggestion. Additional schools would be identified for targeted support. So looking similarly at, let's say, economically disadvantaged or English learners, the number of schools in the bucket between 20, 15, and 10 schools is where you see more change. And then when you get into those very small populations of students in our race and ethnicity reporting categories, where our Black and African American percentage of students in the state is less than 2, you can see the number of schools is widely impacted by 20, 15, and 10. Mm-hmm. So taking all that into consideration, we bring forward these options for consideration and discussion. One other thing that we discovered after looking at all the plans that were approved, because we took a similar approach in our proposal as other states had done, that also had theirs rejected, and they settled on other things. So one consideration is to look at an N size of 20 for all students and all student subgroups, but create that historically underserved race and ethnicity student subgroup, or what we used to call supergroup, or the super subgroup. In the old system, super subgroup it included race and ethnicity and students with disabilities and English learners. But in this model, which is what Oregon proposed, because they have similar demographics and districts and sizes of schools as Idaho, it's an easy way to look. Theirs only includes the race and ethnicity subgroup to capture those very small percentages of students. So here's a couple of options for consideration.
Carlin, is Oregon also, I'm assuming because of the requirements of the law, but they are also still doing subgroups separately?
They have to, everyone does.
In addition to they're doing the historic.
That's how the historically underreported groups get calculated in targeted support improvement. So you would add up the number of students in those 4, I think there's 4, subgroups, so that if you had a total of 20 in those together, you would get picked up in the targeted support and improvement category, but you might not get identified for them individually. So those are some things, and we just like your initial thoughts, input, ideas, strong opinions one way or the other.
Well, what was their argument with the N size being 20?
There's none.
It was you can't have 20 and 10.
Oh,
whatever the N size is, it has
Right.
to be the same across the board. And then just one other quick thing as we talk through this. The letter that is going back to the feds requesting the extension, which we will get, is designed to take us through, and correct me on the time, Carlin, I think through the 16th of February, looking at the board is going to meet on the 14th and 15th. The board will vote on this. So we don't need an answer today, but the sooner that we have that conversation and get it back out, that's when these things will have to be settled. Is by the 14th of February, this has to be, the board will vote again, and then it's back to the feds.
Okay. So questions, thoughts, initial considerations?
So the N size that takes into the 4 different subgroups, that's for reporting to the feds only, but then the smaller subgroups would be for use in-house or whatever.
So ESSA requires that we report all student subgroups on the report card.
Okay.
So we will still publicly report every single subgroup broken out separately. So
5 and down, though, is still redacted.
yeah, right. But publicly reporting, we're still, but when you're talking about the N size use and accountability, it requires that you have a minimum number of students before you're even counted. So by going for 20 in all students and a super subgroup, you get more of those small populations in the targeted support school improvement category. Doesn't change much, as we saw 6 schools, difference in the comprehensive or overall school category.
Have you run the numbers as to what the difference would be for 15 versus doing that super group?
We did not. This was research that I just actually found yesterday in a plan, and I was curious how it played out. So we haven't done, that what a super group would do, but it's probably next on our list if it's of interest. We'll be honest, initially when we discussed it, and I threw this in over the weekend and said, okay, what was the consensus last time we talked super subgroups? Pretty anti-super group, if I remember. People were really opposed to that. But I think that my recollection is that it was specific because it really, it encapsulated students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, and EL learners, as well as the minority race ethnicity groups. And so you got double dinged for multiple kids, sometimes in the same category, or an economically disadvantaged student who's also in a minority race and ethnicity group. And so they were kind of hitting you twice or counting twice. So there's other ways to mitigate that, but I thought that the approach from what Oregon had done seemed pretty straightforward and pretty easy to explain.
Carlin, this is.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Sorry, it's hard to know on the phone when it's okay to speak.
Oh, jump in and we'll navigate.
All right, sorry. So it sounds like we're talking about a 6-school. I mean, at least what I've written down, we're talking 6 schools with the change from 10 to 20.
If we stick with 20 for the all students, yes. And that's
Also,
K8. I should be specific. That's K8, but it's.
Oh, okay. So you're saying to go to 15.
We've given you that option. Yeah, we're providing that as an option to consider, is to go to 15 as a compromise for all students and all students, and then the small subgroup categories as well.
I guess what's the downside?
The downside of staying with 20.
The downside of staying with 20 or the downside of going to 15?
The 15.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a downside.
Here, Debbie, this is Duncan. Here's the trade-off as I see it. A larger N size, because we need to have one N size across all groups. A larger N size, and I'm going to pause here because it looks like the boss. Oh, never mind. The larger N size means that we have less noise when it comes to identifying comprehensive support and improvement schools. The achievement of one student matters less for the overall identification of the school, and that's where the money goes. The CSI schools are where the money goes. So you want a system with less variation with the CSI schools because people don't want to be bouncing in and out of this category. The downside of now that we had to apply the same N size to student subgroups, what you give up with a larger N size is that small groups of minority students become ignored. And there's an argument to be made that the purpose of an accountability system is to make sure that we are illuminating achievement gaps. And if small groups of minority students are ignored, we're not doing that. We're missing that opportunity. So that's what we tried to overcome with the 2 N sizes, and to no avail. So as we go down, as our N size shrinks, then we introduce more noise into CSI, but we gain the opportunity of making sure that we're shining a light on the underperformance of some student groups. And the super subgroup is an option, but you also then lose, you're not actually distinguishing between student groups anymore. So there's an argument that what you're trying to gain with a student super subgroup, you're not actually gaining. And so that's what we're kind of trying to play with here. At least that's Duncan's 2 cents.
Go ahead, Sue.
Well, I guess for us, it's which one helps the most kids. It's the numbers. I mean, which one, it sounds like a smaller end, maybe.
There's something, though, that we've got to be careful of. This is a statewide look at it and a report card. I strongly suspect that even though we may not identify a school based on a subgroup, if the LEA is doing its job, the LEA is going to know it. So I do have to take a little bit of exception when we say these kids may be ignored. I don't know any LEA that's going to go, this kid is struggling, regardless who it is, and say, well, we don't care about that kid because we're okay. So we need to be careful that what we see as a statewide picture really isn't as important as what the LEA sees. And the LEA is going to know if they've got one Asian Pacific child, that school is going to know what that kid's scoring. You know, so that's the trade-off. So I don't want us to lose sight of what the LEAs are going to do for their own children because of we think somebody may get missed.
We just want to make sure they have as much money as they possibly can to do their job.
Yeah. Well,
And the money follows, as Duncan pointed out, those comprehensive support and improvement schools. I think the other consideration that you have to look at is you consider, let's just use Black African American student population. It's less than 2% across the state. If you start extrapolating that out across multiple schools, you're really talking.
We have 728 schools.
Yeah. It isn't very many kids per school. So, you know, I think we have to really, when you do the math, so at a state level, you know, there's some reasonableness to our assumptions about inclusive of more. But at the same time, when you start really dividing that number of students out across multiple schools, 728, it starts to get a little, that's where we introduce that variability. And for some schools, that identification can change from year to year based on population of students. Sure. And so that can have a significant impact. So, you know, all those things to consider, right?
And I should have said before, one of the reasons why we got the big push before to lower the N size was that people wanted as many schools as possible to be able to fall into the bucket of who received money. Well, it turns out that as the N size goes down, the number of additional schools in the bucket doesn't change very much. From 25 to 20 to 15 to 10, it really doesn't change very much. So that was less of a factor than we thought it was going to be before.
So here's
sorry, Debbie, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, here's the $24,000 question. What's your recommendation? What should we do?
Yeah, but that's what we want to hear from the stakeholders. When they go back out and say, look, guys and gals, what makes sense for you? What can you do to make sure that the state is doing what we have to do and you're taken care of? That's where we are, is really wanting to know what the stakeholders come back and say, this is what makes sense to us. This is what we can support. Because the policymakers have been kind of all over the place with it, depending on which one you sit down with. The superintendent's position and the State Department is, we want to support the LEAs in the best way we possibly can. So I don't think we're ready for a number yet, though we will have a number before the board meets next month.
And Debbie, I think from the, you know, we wouldn't probably, I will say this, we would not have brought these recommendations forward if we didn't feel like any of these could be validated and substantiated by data and supported. So really now it's what do stakeholders feel is best, and where they want us to put our efforts. So I think that's as you said, the $24,000 question. It might be a little bit more, but important for us to hear from feedback from that. Joanna?
Carmen, with the Oregon model, through definitions by the government, you know, you'll get a broader number. But when you start separating them, then our numbers will go down, because if you hit Hispanic, then you're Hispanic. You're not anything else. You won't be counted American Indian.
Yeah, that's true. There are definitely issues with multiple race reporting or supergroups that I think some states have addressed in some of their models, and we could look for others. I just happened to cross that one because I knew Oregon had a 20 for all, but I wasn't sure how they addressed it with their their subgroups. So I think I saw Rob's hand over there.
I appreciate, I think most districts, and appreciate what Pete is saying, the larger N has generally been better for districts. They've never been, you know, this whole issue we've had to live with for a long time. And I think what's good for kids, as Pete said, districts aren't weighing by groups and color and just working with kids who are struggling. So all this, the larger the N, in some respects, that gets ridiculous. generally better for districts. So if it was just 20, I mean, I would rather stick with the 20 than compromise the 20, because just to catch the smaller subgroups. I mean, I'd promote more for this 20. If you needed a number, I think that would just be more helpful to districts. But we've always had the tension of what policymakers want with that in. So I think most districts like a larger in, and I mean this respectfully, but then let the compliance people and everyone else having to deal with. If you can get away with larger ends, that helps districts to function and deal with that, in my opinion. So.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on. If you have feedback, please send it to Allison, because this conversation's to be continued. We'll engage more. I know that we have planned a webinar for superintendents and principals as kind of our primary audience for the next one, to discuss end size and the accountability calculation as well. So I think that's an important component. So, okay. All right. The next section is the indicators to identify CSI schools. And as you remember in our plan, we walked through this, I think, quite extensively. The required elements are up in the top blue, and that is academic achievement in English language arts and math, and other academic indicator in all schools that are not high school. So if you have a graduating class, you fall into the high school bucket, and now you report graduation rates. And for elementary and middle schools and any K-11 configured school, you are considered an other, not high school. Graduation rate at high school and English language proficiency for English learners, and then that school quality student success indicator, or the fifth indicator. Now you look there and you go, well, there's actually 6. Remember, 1's blocked for elementary and high school, so just keep that in the framework. In our plan, Idaho submitted a proposal to use the higher percentile rank of a school's academic achievement in ELA or math, or their school growth. Okay, so everyone has that in the framework. And we said, we'll rank you by your performance, and we'll turn that into a percentile, and then your percentile will take the higher, we'll throw out the lower, and that's how we'll identify those schools in the lowest quadrant. And growth in this case was defined as the change in proficiency for the school from 2018 to 2016, because remember, we're identifying in 2018, and we're looking back 2 years as a growth indication. We also proposed higher of the grad rate or growth similar model across all of those, okay? So the feedback from the Department of Education was, you cannot have either or in the calculation, because we're really masking in their terms one indicator for some schools and another indicator for others. And it's not a uniform statewide system for identification. We pushed back, quite frankly, in our innovative approach, because we felt like this really got to highlight the schools that were not achieving and not improving. And so we were looking for ways to address the feedback from the Department of Ed while still maintaining that as our goal. So you'll see that, I think, come out in the next couple of slides. The feedback for the graduation rate indicator was it cannot be an improvement method. It has to be strictly the reported 4-year adjusted cohort. So we said, okay, we can do that. And then they wanted us to clarify in the English language proficiency indicator for English learners that it is the percentage of students making progress to English language proficiency. It's more of a technical correction, but we had indicated that we would also track improvement, and it's very well defined in ESSA that it has to be percentage of students making progress towards proficiency. And then they wanted us to provide additional information on the student survey, as we didn't have the survey identified when we submitted our plan. So that is the other piece of information that's still hanging out yet to be decided. So we'll talk about that one last. But for now,
Go back for 1 second.
Yeah.
So when we look at graduation rate, so then what is and I'm going to just use this word for lack of any other better, a pass for a high school or an alternative high school. So anything over 67% is considered good, or do they have to physically grow every year? So if they were 80% this year, next year they have to at least be 80.01.
Yeah, for school identification, we aren't including any growth target, but it is inclusive in the long-term goals for the state that every school is improving the graduation rate across the board. Because the state has a goal that by 2023, 90% of students will graduate, from 2025, 2023, something like that. But 90% of students will graduate. And so we applied that logic to the long-term goals. So that would mean that if a school this year is 80%, they have to improve, because we would expect that long-term goal to trickle down to every school, right? If every school makes their gains, then the state will make their gains. And if some exceed and some don't, then we should still make our targets. But in the model for identification calculation, we cannot include any kind of improvement in that. It's strictly the four-year cohort adjusted graduation rate. That's it. As defined by the U.S. Department of Ed, what that four-year graduation cohort graduation rate is. So we are, we had proposed an improvement plan, like you'll get credit or higher for your rate or your. So we'll still do the same, order schools by their percent of graduation rate. So then the school with the highest graduation rate would be in the 99th percentile, and the school with the lowest would be in the first percentile or lower. Essentially, but remember, any school, high school identified with a graduation rate of 67% or less is automatically identified for comprehensive support improvement. Doesn't matter what the rest of their indicators say, if their graduation rate isn't higher than 67%, they automatically get caught in that identification system. So, does that answer your question, Pete?
Well, it does. I mean, for me, though, I hate that piece of it because frankly, I'm just off the top of my head, we have like 56 alternative high schools. There's my 5% right there. And so now I can't reach down and help any of my middle schools or elementary.
Well,
however, they still have to meet the N size requirement.
so if our N size
So
is
if our
20,
N size is 20, our alternative schools, there's only 12 in the bucket. And then for graduation rate, there's actually 15. So that addresses some of that.
and just to put an exclamation point on what you just said, Carlin, when you're talking N size for graduation rate, the N is referring to the graduating cohort.
Yeah.
Just 12th graders.
12th grade group.
Which
So.
again goes back into our N size discussion. Because we can really, my words, pimp these alternative schools if we get too aggressive with the small N size.
Who are serving a population.
Who are serving us.
Right, a very specific population, right. Which is some of the concern alternative schools have in the four-year cohort rate. They just, they hate it strictly because it punishes them,
right.
Because of the students that they serve. So,
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so moving on, we have come back with, okay, feds, we hear you, we'll incorporate this. So this is our first option that we propose. The first option takes academic achievement in ELA and math, and now we've separated that and included growth in academic achievement in ELA and math. And we propose growth option 1, which is growth is defined by the change in school proficiency from 2018 compared to 2016, just like we did in our original model. The four-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, we clarified the percentage of English learners making proficiency towards making progress towards English language proficiency. And then we have our school quality and student success indicator. It's important to note that the school quality student success indicator is weighted at 10%. So when you think about 10% and you put a weight to the rest of these, it equals out to be 18% across the board. If you're not a school that has English learners, then it's 22.5%. So each one of those then has the same weight. We still do the same methodology where we rank you based on your performance and it turns into a percentile rank. And then we add up the percentile rank weighted equally at that point. 10% for the school quality success indicator, we haven't changed that methodology. But the approach is then each of these is equally weighted.
And to put in terms of the last plan, essentially what this proposal would do is instead of throwing out the lower of the scores, don't. And yeah, and that it's, and there's another separate too, but essentially just don't throw out the lowest of the scores, period.
So we provide some data analysis for this. We're using the historical data for achievement and growth. So 2017, and Kevin, I'm going to defer back, 2017 compared to 2016, or 2015 to 2017. Okay, so what's unexpected in our data modeling when we did this in the original plan is we first modeled this before last year's results were out. We had 2015 to 2016, and most every school had gains in their scores. And in 2017, statewide assessment results showed sort of this flattened structure or even decline in ELA particularly. And that was unanticipated in the original model. So as you'll see, a little bit of this, it captures the characteristics of the types of schools. We do not have a list, but what we've essentially done is use the data to sort of provide us a way to look at how that calculates out. So ESSA is a K-8 school, and the schools in orange are considered CSI schools. I drew that red box. That's our focus. We want to highlight the schools that are not achieving and not improving, and this is the original methodology. So every school, the y-axis is the average percentage point change in ELA and math proficiency rate from 15 to 17 for the given school, and the x-axis was their average proficiency rate. And that was based on 2017 data. So take that model, advance it 1 year, we go 2018 compared to 2016. Essentially the same calculation. But this is what it looks like. So each one of those schools represents a K-8 school. First impressions of that model, what do you notice? This was the original. Anyone notice anything right off the top? They're kind of all grouped together.
Yeah.
It looks like some sort of psychological test that you're quizzing us on.
It's an IQ test for all of us in the room. Tell us what picture you see. So when we take the option 1 comparison, this is the change. And I don't know if you can even see it. You sort of have to look at it. Here's our methodology for the original. And I can pick out, I think there's 2 that I noticed right away.
Are there schools that change?
There is a very few schools that get identified differently.
Like the one.
Yep, you'll notice there's like one that you see in the bottom of the right-hand side. So an 80% match. When we just changed using, instead of like Duncan said, you're not throwing out the lower or the higher percentile rank, they just carry equal weight. So not a lot of change. So then we said, well, some of the other feedback from the Department of Ed was in that calculation, we actually used a growth model that was different from what's in the framework. And they noted it a couple of times throughout our plan where they said, it says this here, and in the framework, it says in our statewide accountability framework, it says this. And so just to make sure that we're looking at the right, did you mean to do that? And we said, yeah, we did. That was intentional. But since we're revisiting the CSI comprehensive support improvement options, we wanted to throw in this other growth calculation and say, what do you think? And so you'll notice growth option 2, same approach. We go back to ELA and math achievement, our adjusted cohort, and our percent of students making proficiency, our progress towards proficiency. But growth option 2 changes from the school improvement model to the student improvement model, which is percent of students making progress towards proficiency using a trajectory model. I took that language right out of the IDAPA rule that was approved by the board and the legislature, and that is in rule now. So let's talk about what a trajectory model is, just to orientate everyone. Has anyone heard of this before? Everyone knows what a trajectory model is. The language in the plan or in the framework just said growth to proficiency using a trajectory model approved by the board. It did not give us a timeline for that. So we have to identify a timeline for the trajectory model.
In other words, proficient by when?
And proficient, essentially, yeah, what's the timeline? Proficient by when? And we say proficient, we've determined what the goal is. So we know it's proficiency, but at what point in time? So we've got this as an example. Sally's a 6th grader this year. In 2017, her ELA score in grade 5 was 2,447. Okay? To be proficient in 3 years, Sally needs to score 2,567. It's an increase of 120 points. can simply divide that by 3, and we know that every year, assuming Sally meets that same kind of incremental change year over year, she needs to improve 40 points this year on her 2018 ISAT in order to be proficient in 3 years. Okay? So if this is our trajectory model, this is what it looks like graphed, right? Kind of a linear projection. Okay? So we propose this as growth option 2. Remember the original CSI method. Okay? This is the option 2 comparison. And you definitely see a shift. So what we've done is we've taken the percent of students in a particular school who are on track to be proficient. Some of the feedback in the original methodology was, well, I have a different cohort of students than I did 2 years ago. It's only reflective of my students that I have and not what I did with my students. And so this is really identifying that student level improvement and growth. So where the original methodology focused on proficiency and was correlated to school proficiency rates, right? That growth change model was actually correlated to their school proficiency. This gets around proficiency. Moves kids from below basic to basic, or from basic to proficient, or maybe from the low end of basic to the high end of basic in that score range, but not maybe to proficient, at least in a single year. So growth becomes more important distinguishing factor for allocating CSI resources amongst the schools in the 20 to 30% proficiency range. And by that, we're saying if you're hovering around 20 to 30% proficient, but you're not improving your school scores, what are you doing with individual students? And this particular model has a higher impact on schools in that category, in that range, because of that calculation. Remember we talked about, or I mentioned, from 2015 to 2017, we actually saw this unexpected trend where scores went down for schools. So if you start your proficiency in 2015 at 40%, you have higher percentage proficiency, and in 2017, you actually dropped to 28%. You dropped 12 percentage points. But if you started, compared to a school that starts at, say, 4%, they don't have as far to go. So we tried to do this mitigation of growth ceiling and low baseline, but what we didn't think about was low baseline in terms of a regression model and what would happen if you had significant drops. And so schools that had farther to fall actually got identified in our original methodology because their percentile rank really put them at the bottom of that list. An unintended consequence of a good attempt to stay in that bottom quadrant. Now we still did. Still feel really good about that. We still did identify schools in the bottom quadrant in our original methodology, but we wouldn't have identified schools that are the lowest performing. And if this is performance, you know, this school's hovering around 5 or 6 percentage points. In our original methodology, that school, because they started low, didn't have as far to fall, got left out because other schools had a steeper decline. Anything else stand out to you in this compared to the previous one?
Arlen, I appreciate that you used something that had already been approved. I mean, as far as taking that language, I think that was really smart. For the trajectory and the student growth model and all of that.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to message consistency across, you know, all of the accountability systems, so you don't have variation. I think that can be very important for the field and for schools. So
definitely less confusing and less room for an interpretation maybe that unknowingly gets somebody, you know, down a road that they didn't mean to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one thing that's good news is that in neither of them did you, like, in both, we're on the far left, right side. So there is at least that relative to like looking and saying, okay, well, we're neither way up top or off to the right? We're still.
Yeah, so in our original methodology, we're pulling in a few schools that are in the 35% category. But in our new model, we're pushing that down a little bit, but we still creep up here
Creeping up a little
a
bit.
little
yeah.
bit. So there's a trade-off.
But below the 20%.
But
right?
below
Not
the,
this-
yeah, I don't think
Okay.
we hit anybody higher than 28% proficient.
And I'll just add that, Carlin, if you could just go back one slide, that school on the far left of the x-axis, the fact that in our old methodology that school wasn't identified, to us was essentially impossible to defend. Because the lowest
The lowest
achieving,
performing
in terms of outright achievement, the lowest achieving school in the state obviously needs support. So this was frankly, I think to us, a welcome opportunity to re-examine the approach that we were taking without compromising the philosophy that we went into it with, which is still, it remains that we want to identify the schools that are both low performing and not achieving. So we haven't compromised that, but we think that this is a more defensible methodology to achieve that objective.
So here's the things to consider. We just threw a little bit of data at you, some charts and graphs, and some of it is easy to digest and some of it is a little more difficult. But I think the biggest takeaways, the school improvement calculation was really straightforward and easy to understand. Schools could do it and they could see it clearly. It was very, I could stand up in front of my school board and explain it. Much different than SGP and AGP of old days, right? And that was one of the things we heard is we want straightforward, simplistic calculations, none of this complex stuff. The school improvement calculation, as I mentioned, had a high correlation to achievement. So if your school was proficient, it was proficient, and you captured that in the school improvement calculation also, okay? And it still focused on schools with low achievement and not improving. The student growth calculation, the benefits or some of the feedback, schools can get credit for making gains with students who started very far behind but don't quite reach proficiency. Similar to what we heard about maybe possibly some sort of index methodology or something like that, this sort of gives us that option embedded in this growth calculation. Schools with historically high achievement must still make appropriate scale score gains for individual students. So therefore, no school is off the hook. You don't get to say, hey, I've reached my pinnacle of 80% proficient. We're just going to write this out. We're good. No, your students still have to stay on track. So you're responsible for all kids. And it avoids the argument that we're comparing two different cohorts of students, essentially apples to oranges or pears to bananas. Nope. A student comes into your school with whatever score they started with, and you're responsible for that year's improvement, and that alone. Okay? And you avoid that issue where historically low-performing schools are not identified because they don't have room to regress. We need to come up with a term. We have growth ceiling and low baseline. We'll come up with something for that, but essentially, that's what we saw in our original methodology when we had 3 years of data. When we had 2, we didn't see it. When we had 3, we did. And I think, obviously, the student growth trajectory models in the accountability framework. The AOC took up 2 different considerations for the growth to proficiency trajectory model. One was the growth in 3 years, and one was growth to proficiency by the end of 8th grade. The feedback from the AOC was, let's report 2 growth calculations, growth to proficiency in 3 years and proficiency by grade 10, not grade 8, because that's the culmination and that's our high school accountability grade level, and it gave some credence to that. So from a reporting standpoint, that's what we expect to see. The board will see that presentation in February, but for this trajectory model and growth, we're looking at 3 years for the calculation. Maybe not as easy to identify or calculate for schools because it's each individual student, but Kevin has developed this wonderful tool, a trajectory tool, where schools can plug in all their students and identify their 3-year target and get their score and know what they need to make, and they'll be able to do that immediately. So hats off to Kevin for all of his work there. So we'll provide resources to make it as transparent as possible, I guess, is what I'm saying, to mitigate some of those concerns. Initial thoughts, questions, concerns with either of the 2? Do you have a preference initially or feedback for either or? Do not be shy. It does not hurt my feelings. Kevin now ran the data, so it might hurt his feelings, but
Go with 2.
Go with 2. Tell me why.
I like that it focuses on the individual student and their growth.
I would go with 2 as well.
2.
Yeah.
I think Superintendent Ibarra, when I shared these, the preliminary data analysis with her, went, oh, this really focuses on that individual student, and mastery education kind of gives us that opportunity for schools to be innovative in their approach and not focus strictly on proficiency, but moving students where they need to be in that individualized learning. So she was excited to see that as an option.
Well, and teachers really hate when you look at, well, our scores, you know, last spring were this and now this spring they're this, and it's 2 different groups of kids. So being able to say, like, it is these, like, these are my students and this is the progress that student made really, you know, shows, like, this is what happened in your school.
It also answers the question of student mobility.
Mm-hmm. Yep, especially those high mobility schools.
Yeah, and that was a question we addressed. None of our data, I want to be very explicit, none of the data that we modeled included any kind of those accountability business rules that would have to be applied, where mobility and continuous enrollment. We strictly did it with data just to see what would happen with the system. But when you apply those things, there might be some variability in high mobility areas, but not across the board. So I want everyone to know that that isn't, you know, a straight across. We did all the calculations. We know all the business rules. We applied the logic of an N size, and that was it strictly. And those were done with an N size of 20, just so everyone's aware. I think that's important to know. Any other initial thoughts? Erin, what are you thinking?
I like this one as well. The consistency of it are all the other things that we're moving forward, probably where we can set it.
Rob, initially, what do you think principals can?
I think anytime you get something pretty simple to understand and sell with people, and better.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm putting my brick and mortar hat back on, but as a principal, if you have the growth, I appreciate this. I think it's a great idea. But what about that student who makes great gains one year, ranked as proficient? The next year, their gain is not as high. So if we're looking at, say, in the example you had, if you're looking at a 30-point growth in a particular year, they make 50, but then they make 20, they're still on target. So will that come back then in that year and reflect poorly on the school?
It wouldn't, because I think the way that we anticipate the trajectory calculation is it resets on that, you know, new year. So based on the growth I made in this past year, right, my 3-year target then is reestablished for the next 3 years.
So then in thinking that too, if you do have a student who excels in a few years, then does that then put an unrealistic or say maybe a higher ultimate, you know, proficiency goal? Because, you know, I don't want to see, you know, if kids doing well, do they get to a point to where they're almost tapped out?
Yeah, so what you have to think about in this model is this growth is strictly proficiency. And what we settled on was 1 point at the cut, that's it. So proficiency in 3 years is whatever grade you're in now at plus 3 years, and that's your target, and it varies by grade level. But let's just say for the example that we use, that student, in the first year, she does 80-point gain instead of 40, right? Well, she's on track. You get credit for that. And in the next year, her 3-year target is different because now she's going to be, we're looking out to 9th grade. And we do have established cuts for 9th grade. You just wouldn't factor it in, but assume, skip it and go to 10th grade. She's probably still on track with a smaller required gain. We're not capturing any of those students who started advanced. We're not having that expectation that they stay advanced. Perhaps that's something that we want to look at down the road in a growth calculation, so that we're not leaving high achievers out, right? Because if you start advanced, it's pretty easy to stay proficient for the most part to some extent. That's not always the case because it is a vertical scale. So 3rd grade advanced is not 5th grade proficient necessarily. But we could look at that down the road. I think this does those things around, nothing says success to a special ed or an English learner teacher than saying, wow, Susie got 120 points, she's still not proficient. Terrible job, right? Nothing says defeat to a teacher that did this incredible thing with a student in a single year. But because we're strictly looking at proficiency, that becomes the end all be all. And I think the special ed team's school improvement or systemic improvement plan, their ESSA plan, addresses that very thing, because they did not want to look strictly at proficiency. They wanted to look at individual student improvement over time. So this model does that same thing. And I think that was the board's intention and stakeholders' intention when they incorporated a trajectory. It's a much easier calculation than SGP. I'm not a math genius, and I could not do that without creative drawing on the whiteboard in the board presentations I did in my school district.
Yes, the Accountability Oversight Committee, before they recommended it to the board, looked at basically every possible model, a fairly large CCSSO table that gives you a lot of options, and really had some strong conversations about the trade-offs between technical, right, and validity and that side, and versus explainability, simplicity, ease of communication, clarity, and lean towards, based on stakeholder feedback, we lean towards the trajectory. Right.
The goal of the AOC was to serve mom and dad and not a bunch of psychometricians. Put it in layman's terms.
To the point where, you know, initially we went so simple with the school level growth. We tried for so simple that, okay, like maybe let's go a little bit back towards the student level so that we can factor in some of these things that we're saying are important now. So we maybe went a little bit too far on the simple side, but this might be a nice happy medium. We're not at AGP yet.
No.
But we're still doing growth.
And this, remember, is strictly for comprehensive school identification. The targeted support identification methodology is different. It's about achievement gaps between all students and student subgroups. It's not this. It's not the growth. It's not that. Student growth actually gets captured in the long-term goals, if you think about it, and the state's defined long-term goals for achievement. So I think we addressed that in a couple of other ways with student subgroups. So in the essence of time, we're a little bit over, but we appreciate your feedback.
Well,
we have a few more things. Yeah.
The survey has got to be discussed.
So I do not have a slide on the survey, and I'll just tell you why. There is not a decision yet on the survey, other than we have two, I think, that are in the board's consideration. Right. So we heard feedback on the Panorama survey and the Advanced Ed survey. So the board has a special meeting, Allison or Pete, next week, to review the feedback and consider which survey that will be utilized. And once we know that, we will circle back to all of you with how that survey, how the survey responses get turned into something that we use in this identification model. We've been planning down one path with the Panorama survey because it's pretty straightforward. We found a way to use the Advanced Ed survey we think that could work. We'll flush that out. So as soon as the board has a plan to move forward with which survey, then we'll be able to come back and say, here's how we propose to utilize that information and how it will be factored into the 10% weight of the indicators. So if you haven't submitted your feedback, there's still time.
It's due Wednesday.
Due Wednesday. Thank you.
The other thing to also remember, though, for stakeholders is whatever one is selected by the board, and let's just say it doesn't work out to anyone's best interest, we can change it again next year. So it's not like we're signing on for something that's now carved in granite, you know? We can change it again.
And that was very clear to us on the phone with our call. The Fed said, you can, if this is the placeholder, that's okay, but you have to have something, so fill the place, and that's okay. If you find something better down the road, you get to amend your plan, and that's okay. So I think that comes as a great relief, hopefully to anyone who's following the plan. We intend this to be a document that we revisit regularly and look at what's working and what's not, and update as we need to.
So if next year stakeholders don't want a survey, we get rid of surveys. I mean, it could be absenteeism. It wasn't popular, but it could be. It could be participation in after-school activities. I mean, there's still options out there. It was just that within the AOC, initially we had looked at absenteeism In fact, we're kind of moving in that direction, but the stakeholder feedback was, we can't control that, that's beyond our, it's out of our reach, we don't like that. So that's how we ended up with the survey for this year.
So how hard would it be to change the accountability framework then, to take a survey out of the accountability framework?
Wouldn't, it would simply be,
It's a rule change.
just make the recommendation, the board would have to approve it. And then eventually it would probably have to be ratified by the legislature, but it's easily doable. It's not an impossible task.
So Carla and Matt asked the question of this morning when we had our stakeholder meeting about the phone call that you had said we had asked to be a part of that call. So just questioning why we want.
So I honestly will say, I think the timing of that call really restricted our ability to coordinate a time. I think it was, I won't speak for the superintendent and board president Clark because they're not here and that would be unfair, but I think it was just enough to get them in the room and get the call done at a time before the window, because as soon as we knew we had a call time. So on behalf of the department and the board, we owe our apologies to all of you if we screwed that up.
That's our fault.
That's our fault. It certainly wasn't intended, but as soon as we received the letter, you got the copy. The call was really a walkthrough of the letter. Very little, I think there were some questions we were able to ask, but it wasn't about, I participated, Allison was there, Pete was there, members of the board staff, President Clark and the superintendent. So it was just a small group of, let's hear it, let's get it out, and then let's get to work, because the initial response time is 15 days. And so to prolong that and then get into the legislative session, I think the goal for President Clark and for the superintendent was to get it done before the holidays so that we had time to get to work and figure out what we needed to do before the legislature convened. But again, if we messed that up, we're sorry. And but hopefully you've been able to read the feedback. If the call information is important, we all took notes, but nothing that we talked about is not in the letter.
Okay.
Absolutely nothing that I can.
They were actually, those of you who know me know I hate that. But they were actually very, very good. And their biggest concern outside of what these items there were is just be sure we're following ESSA. Beyond that, they weren't too upset about, and they did not at all come back on where you don't have a star system and A through S system. They didn't even raise that as an issue.
Okay.
The format of that meeting was take the feedback that you received in the letter and go point by point and draw our attention to the page in the plan where we needed to address it or to ask questions, and that was it. So we just simply walked through their letter with them on the phone. And
but if we screwed that up, Karen, that's our fault.
We just asked for it and we were just curious why that didn't happen. So.
We screwed up. Actually, Allison screwed up.
Don't blame us.
That's the person who wasn't in the room, yeah.
That way she can't defend herself.
Sure. Allison just shrugs her shoulders and goes, yeah, I wasn't there either. So thank you all for coming. This was our first in the series.
Timeline though for feedback.
Oh, sorry, timeline for feedback. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm looking at Allison and Duncan because we have dates and I am drawing a blank. Hold on, let me pull up the calendar. Wow. Okay, so our plan goes to the board for everyone's reference the 14th and 15th.
It'll be the 14th, it would be under ours.
Okay.
But the materials.
But the materials will have to be before that. So I think
Tracy's pretty good, with the magnitude of this, though, I'm sure Tracy will work. But in fairness to the board, they have to have time to read it.
Yep.
So a minimum of a week probably out from the 14th, at least, yeah.
So if we can have your feedback by the 2nd, is that too late? February 2nd? I'm looking at Allison and Pete and Duncan.
Maybe a little more, because you need to respond to this.
Yeah, I would punch it at least for the 7th. No later than the 7th.
No, we're saying back it up the other way. We're going the 31st or
For why?
for their feedback, so that we have time to respond or incorporate or if we need to provide additional analysis.
I just want to be sure that stakeholders have the time to get that information. I mean, it's a busy time. School has just started again. So I want to be sure that stakeholders have time to have that conversation. if we need to work late, we can work late. That's why, all right, let's go back to the second. Does that work for you guys? Basically 3 weeks. That's right, what's the date? No, today's webinar.
8.
Yeah, so it'd be 4 weeks, give you a month.
Yeah.
Is that enough time?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's funny.
And then that gives us almost a week to work before we have to get it in the trade.
So don't hold it until the last minute.
Can you send us this little PowerPoint?
Yeah.
So we can use that.
I will.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, please do not hold your feedback until the last minute. And if you have follow-up questions, send them early so we have time to research the answers thoroughly. If you send them to me on the second, I'll stay the weekend and do it, I promise.
And I'm not paying.
But yeah, there it is.
I know.
So I'll expect coffee from all of you instead. We do not yet have dates for webinars, but we do have one proposed or one audience of intended members for the end size and the accountability calculation with the growth calculation for principals and superintendents. We're happy to host another one if you need to. If you think that any of your constituents would participate, let us know. It's not exclusive. We're not saying teachers can attend if they want to or others cannot participate. But I think when it comes down to the school identification system, principals have the most questions and superintendents right now are asking, and we want to get in front of it and let them know what our plans are. And as soon as this is finalized and sent to the Fed, you obviously know we'll be doing some touring. So I'll be out in school districts, and I'll send Kevin to volunteer to present growth calculations to school boards and wherever we need to go to make sure that everyone knows. Because we want to make sure that we support schools as we roll it out. So. Okay, so send us your feedback early and often, but no later than the 2nd of February, and I will have Duncan forward the presentation on to all of you. Debbie, any final thoughts from you, or Kirsten, anything you want to add before we close out? I don't know.
I appreciate the information and the time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'll follow up with you on the grad rate question, but I think we're all set there, so.
You guys can get back with
You want this?
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Okay.
I got one from Karen. Thank you. Perfect.
See for